Well, one of the surprising discoveries inside of the Epstein files is not only that Epstein was running a sex pedo trafficking ring in order to potentially blackmail powerful people into doing the bidding of probably Israel or even the United States. There's evidence that maybe he was even working for the CIA, and maybe that's why the United States government is so adamant in covering up the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. But one of the other interesting discoveries that have come out of the files is the fact that he was also a power broker for many. A new investigation has revealed that the Epstein files show Epstein, alongside powerful people like Bill Gates, may have masterminded the COVID pandemic years before the pandemic hit. That they were planning, preparing, they were in ways that would give them more control, more money, more authority, with almost no accountability, that they would gain, they would be able to crush dissent. They would be able to utilize emergency power in a way that never went away. And that this wasn't done in order to prepare for, oh no, what if something happens? People may say, well, it's always good to prepare for, a disaster or something along those lines. But the new investigation and the Epstein files show that this wasn't about preparedness. This was about control. That it wasn't, we'll have these plans in place just in case. It was, we'll have these plans in place so that at the opportune moment, we can trigger them and gain all of this power and control over not only the American people, but the world. Joining us now is Sayer Ji. He is the author of Breaking: The Epstein Files Illuminate a 20-Year Architecture Behind Pandemics as a Business Model, with Bill Gates at the center of the network. He is an author, a researcher. He's a health policy commentator and the founder of greenmedinfo.com, one of the most widely read independent health research platforms in the world. Sayer, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim.
Your piece is long. I have to warn people, I definitely think everybody should go and try to read it. It does take time. It's detailed. This is not just some fly-by-night, slap it together investigative piece that you've done. It takes a solid hour to read this thing. And you've packed it with a lot of evidence that these power players potentially, I don't know if we'd go as far as to say they created COVID, but certainly utilized it in order to implement the level of pandemic that we were subject to. Would you say, how would you categorize it?
Well, it's a pretty shocking set of emails and revelations, because what we're seeing essentially is that there was an entirely new strategy for governance that was introduced through not sovereign nations, through democratic elected officials, but through a NGO structure that was also a charitable investment instrument that was architected by Bill Gates as well as Epstein, very intimately, actually. There's a number of emails that show that, in fact, it was Epstein that had actually orchestrated the entire model for what was going to be, according to Epstein's estimate, something like $100 billion instrument, where they would essentially surveil countries, especially in the third world, like Pakistan, as well as regions that were known to have conflict. And they would basically create infrastructure that could surveil populations in anticipation of pandemics and other serious infectious diseases. And so this was one of the things that Epstein was orchestrating with JP Morgan, as well as some of the world's financial elite. And this was documented in the first, in the now 6-part series, where you have emails that show clearly that Epstein was directing the formation of what would become Project Molecule, which is basically JP Morgan's document laying out a collaboration with, the Gates Foundation, with Melinda and Bill as chairs, along with Warren Buffett and several others, to create what essentially was a permanent structure for deploying vaccines, financing them, and then essentially, once again, creating the equivalent of a militarized model of biosurveillance, which, as we've all lived through now, we know that the World Health Organization, United Nations, was basically creating a supranational biosecurity state that preempted all nations' sovereign constitutions as well as the individuals within those nations.
Okay, so to understand this, they, well before the COVID pandemic actually hit, had put together, we're talking powerful financial institutions, financiers, JP Morgan, Bill Gates, alongside Epstein, that they had put together a plan that they would implement in the event of a pandemic. But the issue is that when you put these plans together and you see, wow, there's a lot of money to be made, and you start to realize as you stack this plan together, you're like, wow, we could make $100 billion. Suddenly that becomes incentive. That becomes motive for wanting to ensure something like this happens. Not just oh, we're such the good guys. If something were to happen, oh, we've got a plan in place. We can do some disaster mitigation, right? That's not what this plan was. This plan was, how are we going to profit? And that then, when you see those numbers and you see numbers as large as $100 billion, you think, okay, how do we make sure this happens?
Well, exactly. In fact, some of the emails are very explicit, where Jeffrey is basically emailing Mary Erdos and others within the sort of financial elite category, specifically saying that Bill Gates is frustrated. We need to make sure that there's additional money for vaccines in this proposal. And keep in mind, the document released, Project Molecule, shows 18 versions of this being drafted in 2011. And from Epstein's actual email language, it's very translatable to the actual draft. It goes from an informal question answer with one of the JP Morgan executives. How are we going to structure this? With, of course, the Melinda Gates Foundation. And it's all about perpetuity, meaning this is going to outlive the founders. This is not just like a one-off investment scheme. This is a new governance system that is going to literally colonize certain nations and individuals with, again, vaccines. So it's a very specific model, and it even explicitly states that there should be an offshore arm for vaccines because it's a tax-neutral jurisdiction and gives them probably less, oversight. And then, of course, very specifically, they want donor anonymity, which is why the donor-advised fund structure is being innovated here, so that you have, as many, large donors as you can get that don't have the obligation of transparency. They can pretty much fund or earmark projects, and no one knows who they are.
So when did this begin? When did the email thread, from what you can dig up in the Epstein files, what year did they start planning this?
So 2011 is really the key year because that's where these, question and answer emails come up between Epstein as well as JP Morgan, where he's literally dictating to them rather informally what would be expressed very formally in Project Molecule. And so, this is also before the email surfaced where, Jeffrey is apparently blackmailing Bill Gates, because of, in the email, it appears as if there's some STD and that, he's going to reveal this to Melinda. What's interesting about that, Kim, is that only 3 weeks after this, this is July, it's mid-July, and it's in August of 2013, when a contract is drafted, which gives Epstein broad immunity negotiating on behalf of Bill to terminate Boris Nikolek, which is the scientific chief officer for Bill Gates. And it gives him such broad immunity that it appears as if, at least from my read, is that it appears as if it could be blackmail that was the motivation behind, Bill signing off all his rights to Epstein in that particular document.
So you're saying that Jeffrey Epstein found out that Bill Gates contracted an STD. He was going to reveal it to his wife, and he used that blackmail in order to gain more leverage in this, or to become the negotiator.
It's highly plausible because it doesn't make any sense that Bill Gates would give him all of those rights and indemnify him were it not for the fact that there were things going on outside of what he has publicly claimed, which is he's just had dinner with him a few times. Clearly, they were architecting an international vehicle for not only essentially financializing disasters in the form of pandemics, right? But also militarizing this to the point where they're basically laying claim to certain regions, which, by the way, the really big revelation here is 2014 and the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which happens to be in a very resource-rich area. This was when the UN, right, literally had to announce an emergency that this was a threat to peace in the world. And they deployed the military. The US deployed the military, declared emergency powers, and essentially took over that region. So this explains why the focus in Project Molecule is not, again, the public good. It doesn't really talk a lot about the welfare of those who would be subject to these interventions, right, and deployments. It's really more about biosurveillance and, again, a militarized model. And again, this is a private email interaction between Epstein as well as J.P. Morgan elite executives as well as Bill Gates, and they're basically architecting this for the world without anyone, looking over it.
When you first spot these emails, like, who is the initiator of this plan? Is it Epstein? Is it Bill Gates? Is it the financial class like J.P. Morgan? Who comes up with who's the mastermind?
Well, that's what's so amazing about these emails is that it looks as if it is actually Epstein. He's the one that is behind it. And his friend, Jess Staley from JP Morgan, is just basically following his instruction. And also Epstein is conveying Bill's frustration that this plan doesn't allow for enough capitalization of vaccines because that appears to be his focus.
Wow. Okay, so they start this in 2011. Then there's Ebola that happens in 2014, and they're able to implement some of this, is what you're saying, with the Ebola outbreak in 2014.
It gets even wilder because it was actually in 2014 that Epstein receives an email from Bill that makes it very clear that he's about to go visit Obama. Right now, at this time, of course, Epstein is a convicted sex offender. And of course, we know he was involved in human trafficking and other things. But the fact that Bill is informing him about his visit with the president, about Ebola specifically, and then within a matter of just a few weeks, the world experiences its first major event where the UN declares it's such an emergency that it's almost like a time of war. And that's when emergency powers are invoked as a sort of rehearsal for what we would see during the COVID-19 years.
So Bill Gates met with Obama and then reported back to Epstein his meeting.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's interesting is in the emails, and I do cover this in the series, Epstein is also consulted, by a former Israeli head of state visiting in a private event with Obama. And it's very clear this is private, off the record, and that, he's being asked, who he thinks should be part of that. So Epstein is at the highest possible level of influence and being read into all what should be, even on a national security level, he should know about these things.
Who was this guy? It's just, I think for so long, many of us believed that Epstein was kind of the lackey. What I had thought up until this latest dump of files is that Epstein was kind of an asset of Mossad, that Ghislaine Maxwell was probably his handler, that she was also involved with Mossad. We know the connection with her father in Mossad. And so the thinking was that Ghislaine was kind of the handler and that Jeffrey Epstein was just sort of this asset, this lackey that kind of they used because he had a certain proclivity that would allow them to, but it's looking more and more like, no, he was the mastermind, and that Mossad was working for him, that the CIA was working for him, that all of these entities were working for him somehow. Like he is and, people were, oh, Epstein's too stupid or Epstein's this. I was like, was he? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, this latest batch of files just show a completely different Jeffrey Epstein than I think many of us thought.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, his relationship to Mandelson is the one that has literally toppled the UK government at this point. We found out just yesterday that Morgan McSweeney he resigned. He was, his chief of staff. He was also the founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. So there you have the tie-in where what we're seeing in these files is that, not only is there this infrastructure being laid down to financialize, militarize, public health. There's also a enforcement arm that emerges in 2021 and 2, where they start trying to equate speech with violence, essentially, to the point where DHS defines dissenting from government narratives as a form of domestic terrorism. So this is part and parcel of what Epstein was involved in. And by the way, his communications with Prince Andrew, are the most concerning as well, because he's getting information that is essentially should be probably a state secret, but he's using that information along with what Mandelson fed him in real time in order to, make billions of dollars in theory because of the financial implications of some of that information.
I don't even know what to make of Jeffrey Epstein at this point anymore, except that this guy was like the devil himself. And that there's no way he's dead. I mean, that's just the one thing I keep coming to. The more and more stuff that has come out in these files, I just think this guy was too powerful. There's no way he's dead. That he definitely got himself out of that situation. And there's so many questions on that. But so basically, they start this project. They're like, wow, there's a lot of money in here. We got to make sure we make all the money we possibly can, and we set this up correctly. They use Ebola as kind of a testing or starting point. Then they develop it even further, and then COVID. And suddenly we ended up with the chaos of COVID, which really, it wasn't actually chaotic at all. It was quite, the people that had this already planned out seemed to know exactly what they were doing and guiding us all like sheep into the state that we were in, essentially. And do you think that, the big concern that many of us have is that they're going to do it again? And it seems like if there was this much money to be made, yes, of course they're going to do it again.
Well, that's a great question. In fact, the other part we haven't even addressed, which directly answers your concern, is the fact that what happened was that in 2017, these discussions came up showing essentially that, there are these reinsurance products that were developed. Swiss Re is one of them. And what they're doing is they're insuring the insurers. So let's say if there's an act of God or war or pandemic, and, even like those insuring events or travel start to get hit, there's an insurance product that ever covers the insurers themselves. And this is being laid out along with things like pandemic bonds the World Bank introduces, which also are a big problem because, they essentially have very specific triggers, and they're called parametric triggers. So if there's this many people that are diagnosed or this many people that are dead, which we know through COVID-19 was a complete farce because of the inadequacies of PCR and false positives and the removal of requirement to even test for COVID for those who were pronounced dead, right? The national vital statistics requirements shifted. So you could have a motorcycle accident. They were still pronouncing people dead from COVID. Why was that? Why was there such a drive? Everyone was, starting to think, okay, this is just absolutely insane. Now we see why, because the financialization of this, creating an entirely new vertical of assets, which is, again, pandemic bonds and insurance policies that profit a certain group in order for, them to be paid out.
So lots of money, more systems being implemented. They're definitely going to do this again. I'm afraid of how they're going to do it. I don't know if the world will go along with another pandemic anytime soon. It would have to be, I think, something something. But then again, Bill Gates wants to shove his vaccines into all of us. So it's got to be something a lot like that, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, that's the crazy thing about the fact that rhetorically, individuals like Bill Gates have been telling us, right? And how many people at the WEF that, oh, it's not when, it's not if, it's when. They're constantly seeding this, that there will be another pandemic. Now, if we look back and we really understand, the origin of the patents that went into, COVID technology going back, 20 years. And then now we look at the other key pieces that were filled in with these email releases, is that there's just an institutional gravitational pull towards further pandemics, whether there's pseudo pandemics or not. The incentive is so great. In fact, the real issue, Kim, is that nation states no longer truly have sovereignty when you subscribe to a system that gives, centralized body. It could be Tedros, right? Who, when you think about Bill Gates' relationship with the WHO, right now, I believe he may even be the primary funder now that the US has left, right? Is that there's one individual that gets to determine, whether or not the whole world locks down in that model. The whole world gets forced to participate in deadly, mRNA technologies. And so that's the system that thankfully the US just pulled the plug on ostensibly. So I think with growing awareness, shows like this, because has this been even addressed in the mainstream media? I have not seen a single report of any of the topics, right? You have to go to X or you have to go to these shows to get the truth. That silence speaks volumes about how their entire system is now being revealed for what it is. And it's in the receipts. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is all just laid out historically with great clarity and all through legal disclosures. So this is all in the public domain now.
Well, I encourage everybody to read your piece. You said it's a 6-part series?
Yeah, since the original release, I can't tell, I haven't slept very much. But the thing about this situation is that when you see each email reveal another part of this submerged iceberg, now we have 6 parts. Actually, the 6th part will be released probably tomorrow. And it further reveals the UK's role in, like you had pointed out, it's not just his ties to the CIA or Mossad. It's really the UK Crown, and it's also the UK, foreign intelligence services, I believe, are most really just implicated in this network that he was at the center of. And that's why we're seeing the entire UK political system go through seismic changes right now.
The thing that's really the most disturbing about your investigative piece, which, by the way, this is, when I read this, I was like, this is like, do you know Whitney Webb? This is like Whitney Webb level investigating. I mean, this is fantastic stuff that you've been doing with this.
Thank you.
But it really does show how screwed we are. And I don't, I hate to say it that way, but it's bad enough when we think the Epstein scandal, was a blackmail operation to gain leverage for like the state of Israel or something. But it's worse when you see, oh no, it was bigger than that. And it's controlling so many aspects. It wasn't just the control, blackmail is one aspect, one tool that can be used. And it seems like he was using so many different tools in order to really genuinely control the world. And to, this is why I just wonder, it's like, I'm not particularly a religious person, but I'm starting to think he's Satan himself, and he's like figured out how to prey on all of the, like what are they called? The deadly sins, right? To prey on all of those deadly sins and that people, the desire for money, and there's lust and there's greed and all of these things. And it just seemed like he took control of each of those things in individuals. He pinpointed it, figured it out. Like, what is it that's going to motivate this person? And was able to wield influence and power over them and over entire industries. And when it's not just about foreign policy, but now we see it's about COVID, pandemic policy, and all of these other things. And then, like you say, the mainstream media is not covering this. Why not? Well, because they're all implicated. A lot of politicians are not saying a word. Why not? Because they're all implicated. This isn't a left and right issue. When you realize everybody's implicated, I don't know how we get out of this. I don't know how we rise up. I mean, yes, we do what we can. You write your pieces, I do my show, right? We're trying the best that we can. But when it's like the mainstream is burying it because they're all in on it, I mean, this is just a different,
Well,
it's quite
I
frightening.
I will say one thing that's encouraging is that I actually found that CNN had just gone over all of the emails that I released in this first part of the series, not attributing, but I was really impressed because that's the first time I saw an organization like CNN actually look factually at what are intrinsically damning, emails where it reveals the entire system. And again, in the US, we're not really seeing many implications in terms of political leadership, but in the UK, this is having such a profound effect. And by the way, they were behind many of the things that happened during, COVID-19 as declared, which include the Ferguson report with a way high case fatality rate, which was used to shut down the United States, and the Steele dossier. There's so many things from the side of the UK's control of the United States, and we're reclaiming a lot of that now. So I'm actually very encouraged. And I'll also say it is true that he in many ways looks like, the devil incarnate, but the other side of it is that he was just operating so smoothly within a system that required that he do these things, because black male and white male kind of rule the world. And this reveals it in such clear detail that I just don't think that it's going to happen anymore in this way. I think there's potentially too much risk, especially when it comes to, the international biosecurity model, which arguably pulling from the World Health Organization and, the 30 plus UN NGOs is a sign that we actually are kind of pulling back some of our sovereignty, I hope.
Well, we can hope. And yeah, you're right. I mean, props to the UK, I suppose, for at least being the only country where people have there's been consequences to the Epstein files. I mean, we've seen now 2 political leaders resign in the UK, and also Prince Andrew has had to basically step aside, with the royal duties and whatnot. I mean, there's been some consequences on that side of the pond, but on our side, there's been virtually 0 consequences whatsoever. So
I see your point.
We'd like to see some of those consequences. Sayer Ji, thank you so much for being here, author, researcher. We do have the link to the first part of the series, of the 6-part series. Definitely encourage everybody to take a look at it. The Epstein Files illuminate a 20-year architecture behind pandemics as a business model with Bill Gates at the center of the network. The link to that piece is down below. Also, to follow you on Twitter or X or whatever that, people can also follow Sayer on X. Highly encourage everybody to do that as well, to get this type of information and reporting that we desperately need in order to expose what's really actually happening out there. So Sayer, thank you. We also do have greenmedinfo.com. That link is also down below, which Sayer is the founder of GreenMedInfo, which is one of the most widely read independent health research platforms in the world. So all 3 of those links are down below. Sayer, thank you so much for being here and giving us your insight.
Thanks so much, Kim.
Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, for free at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.